tries to figure out how to live forever. He ultimately fails, okay? And it ends with Gilgamesh returning home, and he sees happiness in the walled cities, in his people being happy, okay? So the moral of the story is that immortality is not about living forever. Immortality is about doing great things for your people so that you'll be remembered forever, celebrate forever. So the irony is that even though Gilgamesh failed in his quest, he ultimately succeeded in his mission because we have his epic, and so we're able to celebrate him even today. Okay, so it's a story that is being told. The question now is, why is the story being told? And one theory is that this is a concept of kingship. Being a king means not doing whatever you want. Being a king means to serve the people so that people will celebrate you and remember you forever and immortalize you in writing. Okay? That's a theory. All right, but ultimately Gilgamesh is a bureaucratic creation. And I'm going to explain to you how this creation works. Through this creation process, we can understand how human society develops over time. So in the beginning, what happens is that each region has local legends, okay? And these local heroes are celebrated through stories. So stories of demigods like Hercules, right? And the epic heroism. They have these stories because each region has a local king. And this local king says, well, I'm a descendant of Hercules, and therefore I should rule over you, okay? And what will happen is that these stories become a test for the king. If Hercules can fight a lion, then you are his ancestor, descendant, right? You are his descendant, therefore you should fight a lion, okay? And that's how you justify your kingship, through the acts of heroism that's relayed to you in stories. Okay, that's the first step. Second step is what happens is that as these different areas become consolidated into a much larger area, these stories themselves become consolidated. So Gilgamesh was basically different heroes. One king comes to dominate a region. Then what happens afterwards is that as the region becomes larger and larger, you need a bureaucracy. So bureaucratic priests come into power, they add in morality and messaging to control the people and the king. Okay, the major message is the king must serve the people, and then the priests control the king. But what will happen is that these different bureaucratic factions will fight each other, and they will have different versions of the story. Okay, so bureaucratic priests take power, the morality and messaging changes. Okay, as different bureaucratic priests take power. Okay, the king must learn humility. So this is a hard thing to understand, but it's really important for us to understand. Otherwise, you can't understand the Bible and other literary creations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an example to help you better understand this process of storytelling. All right. So let's imagine 3 universities: Ohio State University, Connecticut, and Middlebury, and they all have their own local legends. Okay. So in these places, something happened that captured the imagination of all the students. So maybe at Ohio State University, Michael James gets drunk the night before examination, and he still manages to pass it. And the students are like, that's a great story, okay? But what happens over time is that because it's a great story, as the story is told more and more, it becomes exaggerated. Why? Because it becomes exaggerated, it's much more interesting, it's become much more memorable, okay? And over time, people add color to it to make it even more memorable. If you don't do that, the story becomes forgotten, okay? So the only way to keep the story alive is by constantly exaggerating it and bringing color to it. So let's see what happens. Over time, the story becomes Michael James gets drunk before every examination, and that's an exaggeration. And then, over time, naturally, through the oral tradition, the story becomes even more exaggerated. Michael James begged his professor that he could get 100 on the exam while drunk. After James finished the exam, he vomited on the professor. He threw up on the professor. The professor could not do anything because James had got 100 on the exam. Okay? All right? So human beings just do this naturally. If something happens, they think it's interesting, then it becomes a legend, it becomes a story. Okay? And this happens everywhere. So at college, a football player scores a winning touchdown. Okay? And then it becomes exaggerated. The guy scores touchdown every game, and then even more exaggerated, the guy hits a home run to help his team win the championship, and then later that day, he scores a touchdown to win another, okay? So it becomes more exaggerated. And then let's look at the last one. At Middlebury College, Pat Jack Jackson cannot take a piss, okay? He just does that for no reason. Becomes more exaggerated. He goes to a new city every day to take a piss, okay? And then it becomes even more exaggerated. And now you add color detail to it. Pat Jack drove to Canada and accidentally pissed on a sleeping bear, okay? He ran up a tree while his pants and forest rangers had to come rescue him. Okay? All right? So this is what happens naturally. The story becomes funnier, the story becomes more colorful, more detailed, more exaggerated, so that we're able to remember it, okay? And then over time, what happens is that these stories become consolidated, combined together to form a new story. Okay? Harvard's most legendary student was Pitbull James. He once wrote an exam that no professor could pass. He once hit a home run with one arm. He once pissed on a sleeping bear just so he could knock down the bear with one punch, okay? So it becomes even more exaggerated, it becomes consolidated. Just as the Epic of Gilgamesh, okay? But then what happens is the bureaucrats take over. The people in charge take over, and they have to change the story in order to better control people. And there are different versions of this process. So let's look at 3. All right, you add just one line and you change the story, right? In the first version, when he became a billionaire, he gave it all to Harvard, okay? So obviously Harvard wrote this story to say, you know what, we don't care what you do as long as you give us money, okay? That's the first version. Second version is, when he wrote, he found his true love, he settled down in the woods right full time. Okay, so this is similarly the primacy of writers over athletes, okay? The smart over the brave. And the third is, the bear ate him, okay? So he punched the bear and the bear decides to eat him, which is like, don't be a stupid athlete. Okay? And so when you add these actually lines, you make the story less interesting, less colorful. But you do so in order to better control how people think. And this is a process that we see throughout human history. So think of these classics, of these Chinese classics, right? San Yi, Romance of Three Kingdoms, COG, right? Journey of the West, Straightforward Drive, right? Bandits of the Water Margin. If you read them, they're not that interesting. But before, you can imagine that they were interesting. But the bureaucrats took them and changed them into boring stories that they can now teach school children to brainwash them. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, so that's a process of civilization. All right, so another example is Hesiod's Theogony. And he's talking about Greek mythology, okay? Greek religion. So the process goes like this. At first, Gaia, who is like the mother goddess, and Chaos, they give birth to the gods. Gaia marries one of these gods, Uranus, okay? And they give birth together to 12 titans. But Uranus doesn't really like children, so he beats up his children. So these children, with help from the mother, decide to rebel against Uranus. The youngest son, Cronus, kills Uranus, okay? Then Uranus marries Rhea, and now Cronus is king, but he's afraid that his children will eventually rebel against him, just like he rebelled against his father. Therefore, he eats all his children. Rhea, the mother, is upset about this, so she decides, I'm going to give birth to Zeus in secret. So she runs off to an island, and she gives birth to him in secret, and he leaves Zeus there to grow up, okay? Eventually, he grows up, and then he goes back to Cronus. He becomes cupbearer to Cronus, and then poisons him, okay? And that's how Zeus becomes the ultimate king. What's really interesting for our purposes is that this myth influences the origin story of major historical figures, okay? So if you look at these major historical figures, you will find that it's a very similar story. So Sargon of Akkad, who founded the Akkadian Empire, Romulus and Remus, who founded Rome, King David, who founded Israel, and Genghis Khan of the Mongols, okay? They all share this similar origin story. So where do we get this origin story from? Okay, so going back, we're seeing 3 layers, right? So the first layer is the original layer, which is the animistic layer, okay? So different gods come together and they create humans. The second layer is when Cronus rebels against Uranus and establishes the kingship, okay? third layer is this. The third layer is the most interesting. Usually when you're king, you need a general. What often happens is that the king likes to hire a foreign mercenary to be a general. Why? Because first of all, he's of low birth, right? Therefore no legitimacy. Second, he's a foreigner, and therefore he doesn't have any political factions behind him. But often what happens is that this foreign mercenary is so talented that he's able to build a political faction to overthrow the king and become king himself, because he's really talented. This is true for Genghis Khan, this is true for King David of Israel, this is true for Sargon of Akkad, okay? So there are lots of historical figures like that. Even in Chinese history, you have quite a few historical figures like this as well. So the founder of the Song dynasty was this sort of person. The problem, though, is that once he becomes king, he has a legitimacy problem. He's of low birth, he's a foreigner, right? So what do? You create a myth of Zeus, right? That Zeus himself was of low birth and a foreigner, but not really, because he's a secret son of the king, okay? And that's why you have these stories. To legitimize the king. All right. So again, this follows the dynastic cycle, okay? So in the beginning, the high priestess, who represents the mother goddess, she has a consort. And so they establish a hereditary elite. But this hereditary elite makes people unhappy with the system. So then one prince or one of the sons decides, you know what, I'm gonna form my own political faction. I'm gonna become a warlord. I'm gonna overthrow the queen and the king, okay? And so he slays the consort and marries the high priestess, okay, which is following the pattern of the mythology, right? Then what happens is that after the warlord dies, his son relies on a mercenary as general. Mercenary is often a foreigner and a low birth. Mercenary slays the warlord and makes himself king, okay? Okay? Does that make sense? This is a pattern that we see over and over in history. This explains why the myths are constructed the way they are. Okay, so another way, a metaphor that we can use is think of myths and stories as like house renovation, okay? So when you renovate a house, adding different layers to it. That's literally what's happening. Okay, so we'll look at one last story to show you how this writing process works. Remember, they meant writing in order to basically gaslight the people. So even though Sumeria, Mesopotamia, is developing really quickly, as you can see from this map, it's still a very diverse place, okay? They have different forms of industry and economy. So maybe in the green, you have agriculture, but in the red, it's pastoral, meaning you're raising animals, sheep, goats, you're going all over the place, okay? So there are two different types of agriculture. The first form is you're sedentary. You just stay in one place and you grow your food. You grow your crops. You grow your plants. The second is pastoral, where you're going around and you are feeding your sheep and your goats, okay? If you're a king, or if you're a priest, if you're a bureaucrat, do you prefer agricultural people or pastoral people? Obviously agriculture. Why? Because it's easier to control them, okay? So what they do now is, they're gonna create these mythologies to convince people to give up the free, happy lifestyle of pastoralists and become an enslaved farmer, okay? All right? And the question is how? Well, this is how. This is called the debate between the sheep and the grain, okay? So the sheep and the grain have this debate and they appear before the gods for judgment. The sheep says, I'm the better one. The grain says, no, I'm the better one, okay? So that's this debate. The sheep says this, and king of the gods, make me descend from the holy place, my most precious place. All the yards about Otu, the splendor of kingship, belong to me. Second, king of the mountain embosses the king's emblems and puts his implements in order. He twists a giant rope against the great peaks of the rebel land, he the sling, the quiver, and the long bows. The watch over the elite troops is mine. Sustenance of the workers in the field is mine. The water skin of cool water and the sandals are mine. Sweet oil, the fragrance of the gods, mixed oil, pressed oil, aromatic oil, cedar oil for offerings are mine, okay? So I'm the sheep, look how great I am, okay? I provide clothing for people, I provide sandals, I have oil, which makes people more fragrant. I also provide food for your soldiers. So I'm great. In the gown, my cloth of white wool, the king rejoices on his throne. My clothing is worn by the king himself. Isn't that proof that I'm the greatest? My body glistens on the flesh of the great God. After purification priests, the incarnation priests, and the babe priests have dressed themselves in me for my holy lustration. I walk with them to my holy meal. Okay? So the priests, when they make sacrifices, they sacrifice the sheep. The sheep, the priests aren't going to sacrifice grain, they sacrifice sheep, okay? But your hero plows shield binding and sharps are tools that can be utterly destroyed. What can you put against me? And answer me what you can reply, okay? So that's the argument from the sheep. The grain says, when the beer dough has been carefully prepared in the oven and the mash tended in the oven, Mikashah mixes them for me while your big fully goats and rams are dispatched for my banquet. On thick legs they are made to stand separate from my produce. Your shepherd on the high plain eyes my produce endlessly. When I am standing in a furrow in the field, my farmer chases away your herdsman with his cudgel. Even when they look out for you from the open country to the hidden places, your fears are not removed from you. Fang snakes and bandits, the creatures of the desert, want your life on the high plain. Every night your count is made and your tally stake put into the ground, so your herdsman can tell people how many eels there are and how many young lambs and how many goats and how many young kids. When gentle winds blow through the city and strong winds scatter, they build a milking pen for you. But when gentle winds blow through the city and strong winds scatter, I set up as a equal to Iskar. I am born for the warrior. I do not give up the turn, the bat on legs, the endowments of shepherding. Make up your properties. What can you put against me? And to me, what you can reply. Okay? Well, what Grain says is, first of all, you don't need to protect me. I can protect myself. There are no animals that want to eat me. Okay? And you do less work, you get more of me. Okay? That's the argument. And of course, the gods say that grain is better. Even though people who raise sheep and goats, they're stronger, they're more free, they're more independent. But kings don't want that. So they create these stories, these mythologies, in order to brainwash people out of their freedom, out of their independence. Okay? And that's why we have writing. That's why they invented writing. Okay? Does that make sense to you guys? All right, any questions?
So my first question is, like earlier you mentioned that there are three ancient civilizations that are very close to each other, like Egyptian and
that's right. So yeah, that's right. Yeah.
yeah. And so my question is, like, are there any connections between their distance and how they made all of this myth and their methodologies of creating the gods?
Okay, that's a really good question. It's almost impossible to answer how much they influence each other, okay? Because even if they were not in contact with each other, they would still come up with the myths that they had to come up with in order to justify their hierarchy. It doesn't make sense. So myth making is a natural part of the human process. So do they share these stories together? Probably, okay? But what's important to understand is that these elites are also interested in differentiation. So if I'm in Egypt, I need to prove to my people that I'm superior to the people in Mesopotamia and Indus Valley civilization, and that's why I create the pyramids, right? Okay, if I'm in Mesopotamia, I need to prove that I'm superior. That's why I create the Zergots and the Epic of Gilgamesh. Right? So the actual process, it's hard to say. Okay, so another way of thinking of this is, how much are you influenced by American popular culture? Probably a lot, but how much? Okay. Also, whatever influence that you have, you still also refract it through your own personal needs as well. Okay, so that's a great question. You know, scholars spend a long time, decades, trying to figure out what the actual influence of each culture is on the other culture. And from my perspective, it's not important. We just have to assume that there is influence, that these cultures are in contact with each other, but ultimately at the end of the day, what they come up with has to be unique to their own culture. They want to prove that their culture is superior, and they want to, and they have to address local needs as well. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
And I have another question. Is that I don't know how familiar you are with the Chinese culture, but in our Chinese culture, there is a god who created the earth. Like that is, his name is Pangu.
Hmm.
Like there is this mythology of how Pangu creates the earth, and so my question is like, you can notice that in the Chinese culture, Pangu is a male, and he is the one who sacrificed himself to in order to create the earth, and in other myths like in Egyptians that the creator is this female character. So in your opinion, like, do you think there is like what is the why is this different?
Okay, yeah. So it's hard for us to say what the original myth was. Okay, the process is this: in the very beginning, all myths, all gods should be asexual. Okay, so they are almost they're either non-sexual, like it's not male or female, or they are uh, both male and female. Okay, because in all traditions, the god has to be a balance of forces, right? So the male force and the female force. That's why we have yin and yang. But over time, what will happen is that it will change certain characteristics to reflect better the hierarchy. So maybe in the beginning, when females were in charge, Pangu was a female character. But over time, they'll change it to a male character. All right. It's always impossible for us to go back and um, rebuild or reimagine what it was like originally. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Any more questions, guys? Okay. Great. So I hope this makes sense. And next class, what we're going to do is we will talk about the steppes people. Okay. The people in the steppes. This is civilization, so people who do agriculture. But remember that throughout most of human history, the major conquerors were people from the steppes. Okay, so Genghis Khan came from the steppes. So we'll be discussing them next class. Thank you.
Oh yes, so yes, so yes, so yes, guys. Check. Oh, yes, so yes, guys. Welcome to another episode. And as you can see right now, we do have something very interesting happening. We do have, unfortunately, a series of red candles here on Bitcoin, and Bitcoin now is looking at a potential lower high, guys. I don't like saying that, but lower high is no bueno. Lower high is not something we want to see, especially this late in the 40 cycle, especially now that Bitcoin has to fly. Now, the situation for the bulls is not too critical yet. It's not too critical because when you look at seasonality, there is a bit of hopium, and we did discuss it in the Bull Mania Discord, so I'll post this, and I do agree, there is a bit of hopium. If you look at 2024 and you look at when the pump started, you see it was here towards the end of the year, and we still haven't had the pump. We still haven't had the pump here yet. So, can it happen? Can we get the rocket booster? It could happen, but there's still a bit of a hope. Look at 2023. There is still a bit of rocket booster right here. So can Bitcoin get a very nice, big, fat, fantastic pump? Well, it better can tell it's birds or cow. We have, I mean, literally, we have like 30 days here, okay? We have 30 days to the moon, okay? Now, look here, at 2022, what happened, man? 2022 was bear market, so this is not something we want to look at, ignore that. 2021 is the orange, sorry, is the red one here. Then we have maybe like 10 days until the top, if you look at 2021. Looking at 2020, guys, 2020, this is the one you want to look at. If you want max opium, max upside, this is 2020. Can we repeat something like 2020? Is the yellow one. As you can see, the yellow one, big pump. That's what we want. Next, 2019. What the hell happened in 2019? Don't look at that one. 2018, don't look at 2018. 2017, can we get a nice pump? Bam! There you go, especially towards the end of November 2017. This is the kind of pump we want to see right now for the bulls. 2016, okay, it's too far back, it's too many charts, but as you can see, I mean, looking at seasonality, there is an argument to be made that we have one last leg up, and that's what Bitcoin is coiling up for. We're not betting the farm on it. We're not at all betting the farm on it whatsoever. As you know, we have the risk 30%, 70% in the market. Let's see what else is going to happen. But looking at the time since the halving, time since the low, the cycle is in its final weeks now, final month. So let's see what's going to happen. But all in all, we really need to pump here. I don't like this overall lower high. Okay, we need higher high. Higher high. When you have lower high, it's a downtrend. When you have a series of higher highs in an upward trend. Now, looking at the bullish scenario from the hoping perspective, if you zoom out on the weekly, it is just still consolidation. We're still consolidating above the previous highs right here. I mean, all in all, on the weekly perspective, will look quite good. On the weekly perspective, will look quite okay, quite stable. It's just standard consolidation. We've been consolidating here for, I think it's July basically. If you look all the way here, May, July, something like that. We're still holding the previous highs from last year. Very nice. As you can see, we didn't break below them. We used them as support. But I can tell you now, Bitcoin really needs the booster. We need the booster as soon as possible. And the reason why the market is a bit careful is because you know that we have the Fed announcement tomorrow. The Fed announcement tomorrow is going to be critical for Bitcoin. Critical because tomorrow will tell us are the cutting rates or not. And even if they cut rates, they need to cut more than 25 basis points for us to have some kind of nice pump. Why? Because if they just cut 25, it's always expected. Now, something else that may happen, if they only cut 25, but the Fed starts talking about ending QT, we're still gonna pump. So all in all, it's more about what they say. The Fed has to tell us QT is over, we're gonna print. Big print is coming. And this is something, by the way, that the stock market is kind of sniffing out. If you look at the stock market, it's like a machine. And Nasdaq, by the way, now is outperforming Bitcoin of the yearly. That's another bullish scenario that Bitcoin is gonna catch up. Oh, by the way, you're correct. It's Wednesday. Today is Wednesday. It's today. It's not tomorrow. Today. See, that's why we have the fact checking. The fact checker. My brain is still in Tuesday. It's Wednesday today.
Maybe the most egregious pick in 2025 draft.
which is a Texas Hold'em game on base to play with your friends. So first, you just select a buy-in amount, and then you pay that buy-in amount to create the room, which also buys yourself in for that amount of ETH. Alright, now you can see that my room is created, and on the top left corner is my room code, which I can click to copy. Alright, so now I'm on my phone. I'm just going to copy the code and join on my Farcaster Mini app. Here you can see that I'm paying the 0.01 buy-in fee. And now you can see that we're both in the room and I'm able to start the hand. So while editing this video, I do want to make it clear that these two videos from my mobile device and my PC did not sync up perfectly. So this gameplay may be a little off to the audience right now.
like, no.
I ain't mad at dudes for that though.
We saw the vision, bro.
I wasn't